Imagine a world where more women had the time to fully explore their genius. Welcome to She Rebel Radio, a community-driven podcast dedicated to supporting women leaders to unlearn conventional rules and create their businesses of significance. This is our International Women's Day Inspire series with our headline partners, NatWest. NatWest has been a pioneer in supporting women in business since 2019. We have 10 new guests sharing their stories with you to inspire, to educate, and to empower. As you navigate this series with us, I'd love for you to consider, what is inspiring you for 2024? How do you personally make it work as a woman in business? And what change would you make to your industry to inspire more inclusion of women? My name's Lulu Mins. I host retreats and create spaces for women leaders to explore their genius. And today, I'm going to create that same space right here for you on this podcast. Hayfa, it's amazing to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm really well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I am good. And I'd love to start with you telling us more about your first fashion business, which I believe was inspired by your grandparents who were refugees. How did your family journey and heritage inspire you to do something different with fashion?
Yeah, of course. So my family are Palestinian refugees. They were displaced decades ago. So they moved around a lot, but eventually and very luckily settled in Jordan. And one big thing for me that I really recognize is that the only reason I'm not living in a refugee camp is just pure luck. I mean, there's so many of my people that still are. And I really wanted to talk about kind of the plight of refugees, because people often forget them. They hear the stats, it's all horrible, but they don't know the person behind them. And it's also really important to remember that being a refugee isn't actually temporary. People think that they move there into camps and they're forgotten, but many have remained in the same refugee camps that they fled to. So what was supposed to be kind of temporary tents have now turned into these really horrible, flimsy permanent homes, really terrible conditions. People are still relying on aid decades later. And I think with the political situation the way that it is, they've got no means of escaping. And I've met many of these refugees, and what I really wanted to do is just show that refugees and Palestinians in particular, we're not victims of war. We've got really rich heritage, people, great culture, art, food. And I really want to do something that kind of preserves that culture and speaks in a positive way about it. And that's where Tatriz came in, which is what Kannava does. It celebrates this art of Tatriz. And Tatriz is a really old embroidery skill that tells stories of women. It's colorful, it's based on nature, it's really nice. But I think, as with every other artisan technique, it's dying out. It's being taken over by machinery because it's expensive to make, and too time consuming. So I really wanted to revive it and kind of tell the story of people through fashion.
Yeah, beautiful. And with the embroidery, that is connected to women only. Is that the heritage or the lineage?
Traditionally, it was connected to women. So the women would, the old stories are that they'd live on the farms. So Palestinians own farms. And they would kind of sit there, and how my grandma was told it, they'd sit under the tree and they'd embroider things that they'd see around them for their clothes. They used to make their own clothes. So a lot of the embroidery is inspired by nature. There's birds, there's leaves, there's fruits. I haven't actually come across men that embroider. And I think that's really tied into cultures and the roles that different people had to play.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we've had previous guests on She Rebel Radio as well, which have been some of our most popular in terms of, women and our connection to nature as well, which
Yeah.
yeah, which you've really interweaved there. And with your business, Kannava, if I pronounced that correctly,
Yes.
um, how did you create a different business model, or did you need to create a different business model that actually worked for women?
Yes. So traditionally, I think, as I was saying, these women had lived in the camps for quite a long time. Some of them had been displaced and were still around, or some of them had grown up in the camps their entire lives. And they weren't used to working. There's not many opportunities for any refugee to work in those camps, let alone women. So it was really difficult. I couldn't go in and be like, right, we're creating this business. You start embroidering, you get £10 an hour, off you go. It really had to be quite different. And also, although I know Tatris, it's part of my culture and heritage. I'm not the one embroidering. So a lot of it was done through co-creation. So what I wanted to do was really involve the women in creating those designs, because as I was saying, the whole point of Kannava was to preserve the art and get women to tell their stories through Tatris and their culture. So we did a lot of co-creation. I worked actually with a family centre that was in the refugee camps. They would typically provide support to some of the families there, and I worked with them to find some of these artisans that were living in the camps. So as they were kind of experts in their field, the way that we did it was we worked together, we created those designs, and I said to them, okay, we know that your family situation is quite different. They can't all go to the family centre and do the tatris there because they're sole carers for their family. They have travel costs, which are quite expensive to get to there. So we'd meet them, and I would often fly to Jordan, or I would work with someone there. And then when we'd come to the center, we talk about the designs that we wanted, and they take it away and work within their own homes. However they wanted to do, we completely respected their conditions and kind of the time pressures that they had. So whereas one woman, for example, would take away a piece and she would spend 2 weeks creating it because she could spend multiple hours a day working on it, another woman might have the same piece and spend a couple of months on it. So the fairest way that we thought we could do that was actually do it based on the amount of thread that they used rather than time. So we had to create this slightly different model, taking into account kind of the conditions they were living in, the fact that they were working from home, and do what they could do.
Yeah, yeah. And did you? I think it's really important, as you highlighted right at the outset, that people can see, refugee camps as something that is temporary rather than permanent. And when you first went to the refugee camps in Jordan, was that with a view to creating the business, or did the business evolve as you were visiting and having conversation?
So the business too. So when I was younger, I'd visited those refugee camps. I was very aware of them. They're kind of dotted around, and I also went to Lebanon and seen them. And my father actually, he is a doctor and provides support in those camps. So I'd always knew they were there, and we'd always known about the conditions. But it was when the refugee crisis, I suppose, kind of happened here, that I thought something has to change. We have to humanize the people there and try and find a way to kind of break this cycle of living in poverty for decades. So when I then started going to the refugee camps, it was with a view, when visiting them a lot more often, it was with a view of starting Kannava.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's but yeah, that totally makes sense in terms of it had always been in your awareness that that was happening, and how that's evolved
Yeah.
into the business. And your background personally is in compliance rather than fashion. How did that support you to come into a different industry with such a unique perspective?
Yeah, so it's entirely different, completely different office setting as well. So, but I think it's always good to work and do something different. It gives you complementary skills. And just thinking about this, I'd say it made me really customer focused. So I've worked in loads of different areas, and one of the areas is about treating customers fairly, resolving disputes, making sure that disputes don't arise, giving the best service that you can. So that's something I'm really hyper focused on, making sure we're always really listening and building our proposition with customers in mind, so they're happy, because without them, we're nothing.
Yeah.
Making them feel safe and protected. And that's probably more a little bit more for Swished, which we'll come to later. Um, I'm also always looking for risk. It makes you very risk minded. You always know that something is on the horizon. So you kind of look at that, and it's helped me really remain a bit calmer and focused, I think, when something goes wrong, because things always go wrong in business. And you can kind of lose your head really quickly. But my whole background is in things kind of preventing things from going wrong. So I just believe that everything can kind of be resolved, really stay focused and stay calm, write it out. Everything can be done.
Yeah, and sometimes it can almost be a shift in a different direction, but the right one. What would you say to, including, the report with NatWest on women in business, and there's been lots of research done about it, that women are more averse to risk. Is that something you think that, women and people really need to be used to if they're going to step into business? As you say, things can always go wrong.
Yeah, I think so. I think naturally women are more averse to risk. And I think when you're building a business, um, it's quite difficult because it feels like it's your baby. And if you're taking risks, you're like, if I do this, will something go wrong? It's going so well here. But what I've learned is that you're right, things always go wrong. We've had situations where things have done really brilliantly, and suddenly something changes in Google settings or tech, and there's a curveball. And you think suddenly everything that you've done really, really well because you've averted risk isn't going so great now, but you have to experiment all over again. So I think although women can be more averse to risk, you actually just have to do it. You've got to go with it, especially when you're a smaller business and people might not notice so much. It's all about experimenting, just kind of going for it. Even though it's your baby and you really care about it, you can only develop through kind of taking risks.
Yeah, yeah. And it's that I think lots of women as well have that real heart-based leadership within their business. As you say, it's their baby, they care about what they're doing. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that can affect the risks that we can be prepared to take. Now, what else did you learn about yourself with your first business and the fashion industry? Because this was your first venture in fashion.
Yeah, I think one big thing that stands out for me, and I talk about this a lot, is that it's impossible to create ethical, sustainable fashion affordably. It's just not possible. You can't do it.
Mm,
Ethical here is a big thing for me. We talk about sustainability quite a lot. It's such a buzzword. People love to talk about sustainability. And what I think is that even if a brand kind of creates an item sustainably, which I'm suspicious of if it's priced low, but that's a different story,
yeah,
it definitely can't be ethical and sustainable and sell for £20. You have to still pay someone a fair wage. If you've managed to source your materials sustainably, you have to pay people a fair wage. And that's why Kannava was really expensive. And something that I would want to do and love to is ask people to shop more sustainably. But when you're just constantly, when true sustainable fashion is quite expensive, and it's focused towards a particular affluent woman
hmm,
and young women, so many of them they like experimenting with fashion. They won't have hundreds to spend on a dress when their friends are going out and they're wearing different items. They can't really be that sustainable, especially with things like social media, ads. It's just so hard.
yeah.
So
And do you think it's got worse as well? Because certainly from my generation, we didn't have social media when we were going out. So in terms of wearing different things and not being
yeah,
seen in the same
absolutely.
outfit, because it didn't really
Yeah.
matter in the 90s when I was out doing that stuff.
Of course, and even like that aside, that peer pressure is massive. Like you're seeing on social media, you're seeing someone else. But the other thing that's really different now than also when I was growing up around that age is targeted ads. Ads are brilliant. You keep seeing the same thing over and over again. And you're seeing this new dress, and you're like, oh, that's really great. And then you see an influencer in it, and you're like, oh, that's really nice. I won't shop, I won't shop. And then suddenly you're like, oh, I've got an event. Okay, I'll just buy it for this. So it's a lot harder. And when all your friends are constantly shopping and having new items, you don't want to be the only person that doesn't. So
Yeah.
definitely social media, influencer culture, ads, all of that, I think really, really adds up to the pressure. And I think it's a conflict, really. Loads of people do want to be sustainable, but you're like, oh, should I be stylish or should I be sustainable? And it's a really hard choice.
Yeah, yeah, and it's hard to resist, as a woman in your 40s, let alone, in your 20s or your late teens, with social media and keeping up with friends. Now, I feel like we can feel into how that led to the creation of Swished, but do tell us.
Yeah, of course. So I was doing a lot of pop-ups with Canva actually, and I still came across lots of young women that were telling me that they loved the brand, they really loved the idea of sustainable fashion, but they just found it too expensive. So I had always been interested in the idea of fashion rentals, and it's quite big in the US and Australia. So it's been around. And we're also used to borrowing stuff, aren't we, from your sister, from your friends, whether it's clothes or a handbag or something. It exists, the idea of borrowing. And even men have it. Men have actually pioneered fashion rentals with a tux. So if men want to go to a black tie, they just hire a tux. That's been around, but not so much for women. So,
Although I was at a funeral of a very good family friend who was like in her 80s, and one of the stories from one of the ladies there that may interest you, and they grew up in the East End of London, way back when, that they used to share a ponytail that they bought.
oh,
Whichever girl was going to the dance, they would share. So I think their generation, there wasn't as much access. The girls would share a lipstick or a ponytail or something whenever they were going to the dance on the Friday night to meet the boys or whatever.
I love that. So it exists. This sharing thing is such a big thing. We all do it. So it's really bizarre that when it's come to fashion, it's not been as mainstream for people, especially with this kind of culture of always wearing new. So yeah, for me, it's kind of, I always call it a big community wardrobe. So it's kind of like borrowing from your sister or friend, but with thousands more women. So, it's a lot more trendy and it increases the life cycle of clothes. I mean, there's billions of pounds of clothes already sat in people's wardrobes. Some of the people will sell it, some people will kind of keep it because they love it. So why not just make money from that? Really increase that kind of circular fashion model in an affordable, sustainable way.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
love
that's where
that.
Swish came about. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And as you said, it's like borrowing from your sisters or your friends with permission, right? Because me and my sisters, I've got two older sisters. We used to argue about whether we'd
Sure.
stolen each other's hairspray or something like that when we were teenagers. But yeah, this is with
Yeah.
permission, as you said, a community wardrobe.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's quite fun as well. Like people message each other, they'll tell them the events that they're going to, and it's so nice. It's quite wholesome as well.
Yeah, and it makes you think about as well that conditioning that we've had that it's got to be new, it's got to be ours, is actually, I think particularly for us as women, um, removed us from what is natural to us in terms of, sharing with our sisters, with our friends, and both getting enjoyment out of those items.
Yeah, especially if you're only wearing it for a few hours, right? So if you bought a dress that's say £200 and you wore it for a few hours, that's still new. So someone else can wear it again and it's still new. It's only clothes aren't made to be disposed of after 5, 6 hours wear. Like you can rent it out like 4 or 5 times and it will still look as new. I've got some dresses and we don't do really high-end designer because that's not what I want to do. But I've had some dresses that aren't very expensive at all, £150 that I've rented 5, 6 times and they still look great. You just clean them properly. People wear things for not very long.
Yeah, and particularly, kind of Christmas dues and those kind of
Yeah,
dresses, almost the more bespoke they are, the less likely you are to wear them again for something
absolutely.
specific.
Yeah. And if you're
Um,
renting it as well, if you're renting it out, you still have the opportunity to wear it again if you want to.
Mm, yeah, no, it's a brilliant solution. Now, you say fashion can be a force for social change. What are some of the key differences between fast fashion and slow fashion? And is the world ready? What is holding us back?
Yeah, I mean, fashion is so huge. As I said before, it tells stories. It kind of, when you put on something new, it's how you feel, how you express yourself. It's such a massive part of culture. And with slow fashion, it can be made thoughtfully by skilled artisans, and that's absolutely fantastic. I love that. But I'll come back to this again. It's not affordable. You really can't create slow, ethical, sustainable fashion affordably. And I think fast fashion for me has done really well. And they're growing massively. It's because they've managed to mass produce items really low cost and feed into people's kind of those desires to feel really good. You don't get that fashion hit when you first wear a dress and you feel really good about yourself. They'll be able to follow influencers that they look up to and they won't have to spend very much. So if we ask that audience about sustainable fashion, what they said to us, it's kind of they see it as expensive for the privileged or not really very trendy. So for me, that the reason that kind of I started Swished and it's important to me is that to move people to buy more for sustainable fashion, you have to make it really easy for them to make switches. There has to be what I think of as kind of a transitional period. And that's where renting comes in. It's that transition from going from fast fashion buying to a more affordable kind of sustainable option where you still get that new clothes hit that you would if you bought something new, but by borrowing rather than buying. And actually, you look so much better because you're wearing a really expensive dress for exactly the same price as a fast fashion dress. And I think the thing is, it's fair to say that ultimately the best thing to do to be sustainable is not to consume. I back that. But that's not reality for most people. People aren't going to stop buying. We've been telling people to stop buying for a while. They won't. And that's not really fair. Especially for those, like we talked about a bit earlier, about social media pressures, those that want to experiment with fashion where their friends are already wearing loads of new clothes. So where Swished comes in really for me is to say, okay, consume, wear what you love, but do it in a slightly different way that doesn't feel like you're making sacrifices. So, I mean, just going back to your original question of what's holding us back from going to making the switch, I just think it is that affordable, sustainable alternatives to fast fashion lack. They really lack. And that's what where Swished comes in, and that's what we're trying to solve.
Yeah, I love that. And as you explain, we are in a transitional period in so
Yeah.
many things and in so many ways. And I think often with the sustainability, thing that arises is that people can feel really overwhelmed by what to change. So they actually change nothing. Whereas if we do little, make those little changes, we can make a big difference, whether that's our fashion
Yeah.
or changing what deodorant we use or whatever it may be. It's a great way to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think anyone is just going to suddenly stop doing something. We're all aware of the impact of fast fashion on the planet, but those brands are still growing. So we just have to make sure that we make any transition so easy that it's actually better. So what we're saying to them is have new clothes, but you're saving money wearing something way more expensive than you'd usually be able to afford and still kind of have that swap. And
Yeah.
it really it answers that conflict that we talk about, which we spoke about earlier, which is sustainability versus style. And you don't have to make that sacrifice with renting.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've said about you can save money, but you can also make money. So
Yeah.
tell us about those of your users who are putting items on. What impact is the additional income having for them, with the cost of living that has shot up and, particularly for the younger generation in terms of, having opportunities to earn decent sums of money and get a good start in life?
Yeah, so most of our renters and listers, our platform, our branding, everything is focused towards kind of young women, mainly 18 to 35, and slightly older, but we are targeting that audience that's really feeling the cost of living the most. And when it comes to listers, how much they make really does vary. It varies on seasons, kind of the items they have, whether they're sharing their wardrobes on social media. Think of it like Depop, I suppose. Um, if you have more items, if you're talking about it more, if you're telling people that it exists, you're going to make more. So it varies. Honestly, we've had some incredible listers that have earned over £20,000, and she's used the money to pay for her child's education, which is absolutely fantastic. And then you've got other people that are just making that money to fund their night out. Cost of living has gone up, bills has gone up. Lots of people that we're seeing that, especially that are renting, are spending most of their money on rent and bills. So that extra couple of £100 that they're making a month from renting out with Swished, that funds their nights out. And nights out and doing stuff is all part of the experience of growing up, right?
Yeah.
Meeting friends, socializing. And a lot of people can't afford to do that at the moment. So that's where Swish kind of comes in. And that's what I love. I love that it's just for normal people who've got some nice items and they rent it out and they can fund a more interesting lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah, and you're so right. It's such an important part of growing up. I used to work for my parents and earn £20 or £25. They used to have a record shop, and that would take me out 5 nights a week when I was kind of 17, 18, which
Yeah.
is crazy. It wouldn't get you very far now. And I love also it also teaches your users, that little listers, to be quite entrepreneurial as well, and to put something out there and think about how they're going to do that and all of that, which can only be a benefit as well.
Yeah, and I mean, we've got some amazing listers, so that also will buy items that they know will rent well. So they'll source them in, and if someone asks for a size, they'll know that it does really well. So they'll get it, they'll rent it out a few times, they'll make their money back after 3 rentals, and they'll keep renting it out if it's still trending, or they sell it, and they're making a massive profit on those items. And we specialize. So inclusive for me is massive, and affordability, I think that's already come across as massive. And we specialize in rentals from around £5 a day. We don't add loads of hidden fees or commissions to push prices up. And that means the platform is a lot more accessible. We're not looking for designer dresses that are worth thousands. It's just normal items that will rent at a price that is still competing with fast fashion.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Now, what have been some of your biggest challenges so far when creating a business which is shaking up an industry?
Yeah, I think there's always challenges with a business, but perhaps I'd say our unique challenge is that renting is such a new concept for a lot of our audience. So we're spending a lot of time and effort market making. So we're educating people, telling them that Swished exists, and we're not only kind of telling them about this new concept, we're also trying to build trust in our brand. And that is big. Not only is it a new brand, it's also a new concept. So people have a lot of questions, and that's fair. That takes a lot of time. And for anyone that we do come across that's heard of rentals before, they just think it's so expensive because they've come across other platforms that do rent designer dresses. They have dresses that they've seen that retail for thousands of pounds that you can rent for £200. And that's a fantastic deal, but still unaffordable and way out of their price point. So we spend a lot of time building out our audience, educating them about rentals, market making. And with a platform, as any platform, it only works if you have two sides, right? Your listers and your renters. So they both need to be talking about it. And our success relies on our community. They mean everything to me. Without them, we're nothing. So to build the trust, to build the awareness, we need to make sure we get as many people comfortable talking about rentals and being advocates. But the reality is, and you may know this from resale, rentals isn't mainstream. People aren't sure whether it's cool. Can they talk about it? Can they tell their friends about rentals? So we really view ourselves as kind of being where resale was 10 years ago. Um,
Mm.
but it's changing. It is changing. It's taking time. There's no hacks. But that really, for me, means that we're building kind of a scalable, sustainable business model with community at its core. So everything we do is for them in mind. We're taking our time to do it properly. And we're seeing the uptick now with rentals. We're where resale was. So it's getting there.
And is there any particular platform you use to build and connect with your community?
We don't use a particular, so we use social media,
Hmm.
talk to our community quite a lot. So get feedback. Even before we started Swished, we did loads of customer interviews. If someone's rented on Swished, we'll often talk to them. If they've listed on Swished, we'll talk to them. It's all about talking and building with your community, really. When we introduce new features, we're a startup. We don't have a bottomless pit of money, but when we're introducing new features, it's because we've got that feedback from them. So beyond kind of socials, which is difficult sometimes to create communities on and sell products and whatever, it's working with our community.
Brilliant. That's good to hear. Now, you've raised two rounds of funding. I believe you're currently on the third round. Is there anything you can share with us about your funding journey for Swished? Because Swished is also an app as well, isn't it?
Yes, so Swished is actually app first. We started on a web to kind of build out our MVP, see if people like it, and then yeah, we moved on to an app. So it's an app first platform where we kind of build out that community. People can list their items, they can talk to each other, they can track where their rentals is, where when their rentals are coming. We've got a calendar, so definitely download it. It's a great app.
Mhm.
But in terms of our funding, so we we started our funding route funding during COVID, actually, when we first thought about building Swished, and I've done it a few times now, and in the middle of our third funding round. And I just say talk to as many angels and investors as possible. I mean, even if they're not part of your industry, the insight and feedback that they give us is absolutely incredible. We've spoken to investors knowing that they're not going to invest just for advice. I mean, and even when you get rejections, it doesn't mean that the business isn't fantastic. It's just not right for that person. Investors need to put money in things that they know. And because we're going with angels and kind of smaller investments, we're looking for people that can help us build out our brand as well. So when they say no to us, what we do is we learn. We don't take it personally. We listen to their feedback, kind of listen why they didn't like it or why it wasn't for them. It wasn't for them because they don't feel that they've got the skills to help us. That's completely fine. There's loads of no's as well, but you just have to kind of be resilient, listen to people, change your deck, get more customer insights, just keep going. I've never heard anyone tell us that funding is super easy. So use it as an opportunity. Pitching is so much fun. Get feedback, improve, kind of move on.
Yeah, yeah, amazing. Now, how do you personally make it work as a woman in business, and what change would you make in your industry to inspire more inclusion of women?
So I have a very young daughter. She's 1. And I think one big thing that when I was pregnant, I wanted to hide that I was pregnant. I didn't think people would take me seriously because I was a mother. I wouldn't have enough time to spend on my business. It wouldn't work out. And that's quite sad, I think, because you're in an industry, especially with investors and that are usually male. You're trying to be taken seriously. We all know the stats about how many women get funded, and I just didn't want anyone to kind of know that I was pregnant, I was a mum, and I think that in itself is quite sad. I think there needs to be a lot more support for women going into business if they've got young families. And I'm so privileged. I've got a good support network and can afford to send my daughter to nursery, but nursery is really expensive. So if people don't have that, then how are they supposed to juggle everything, juggle childcare, juggle starting a business, juggle be taken seriously? And I think there needs to be a lot more support around women. And I'd love to do something where just childcare is a bit more accessible, it's a bit more affordable, and women are supported on that journey where they don't feel like they won't be taken seriously because they've got a child. I described my businesses earlier as our children because I've got one. You really love building a business just like you love kind of spending time with your child. So I think women should be taken a bit more seriously.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. It's yeah, and how can, being a mother and having children be seen as an asset in terms of being a business
Absolutely.
owner and managing to juggle all those moving pieces and taking risks and things going wrong and all of the things that can happen.
Yeah, I'm more focused now. I know what I'm doing. I've got someone to build for as well. So I think women that are in families or just in business or young mothers don't need to feel like they won't be taken seriously. Sometimes some people will look down on that. They won't really appreciate it, but I think we're definitely an asset. It's taught me so much.
Yeah, and it's about us as women also supporting each other with that, which I think there's been a real movement from that
Absolutely.
over, yeah, the last 10 years. And I quite often call a separation is like a masculine principle. And in, the togetherness as one that we can do both. It doesn't, kind of men created the world where, they go out to work and that's separate from the family. And that doesn't need to be the next generation of how we move forward and create businesses.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
you've been part of the NatWest Accelerator, and how's that been? And has there been any change that you would make to your business journey so far?
So the NatWest Accelerator has been absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed it. We've been on other accelerators before, but I think what the NatWest one is really special is because it brings loads of founders into a room. And I don't know if there's any fashion founders actually, but they're all from different industries. And just meeting and talking to people, you realize that they're all facing the same challenges regardless of kind of what industry that you're in. They're inspiring. Some people are way further in their journey than we are, and some people are just starting out. So you're learning from someone that's really far ahead and they're quite inspiring, but also you feel like you can help other people, connect with other people, and help them too. And it's those connections that are really difficult to create when you're doing business because I'll be in the office or at work and I'll just think to myself, okay, just work on Swished, work on Swished. Trying to create those networks and meeting other founders is actually quite hard, but you learn so much from them.
Hmm.
And mentors, I talk about mentors all the time. It's such an important thing to have, especially when you're a startup and you don't have the money to create a leadership team. I mean, my co-founder is an innovation consultant and he helps advise some of the world's biggest brands on creating new concepts and launching them to market. So we've got that, but we don't know everything else. We don't know everything about marketing, about raising funds, about kind of finance. There's so much that we don't know. And typically in a business, you create a leadership team around you, don't you, that help complement your skills. And that's where mentors come in. They're fantastic. They've been through it all. They've seen loads of different businesses. They've learned. So they really help grow your business and keep you focused in the right way. And risk taking is massive. Doing experiments for a business is massive. And having a mentor that pushes you to do that and gives you ideas on the different experiments to have is really fantastic. And NatWest has introduced me to some really great people.
Amazing. Yeah. And conversations with the right people create,
Yeah,
right? It
absolutely.
moves us forward in the right direction. Now, what is inspiring you for 2024 and where can we find you?
So customers, community, always inspiring me. So 2024, I think is definitely for them. So we are launching some new features, some I can talk about, like reviews. Something that I said earlier was about building trust in our community. So reviews is really important, and we're building that soon. Others I can't really talk about because we're still experimenting, still taking risks. I'd also love to do more pop-ups to really connect with our community. I did that a lot with Kannava, and I'd love to do that with Swished. I really like talking to our customers, interacting them, showing them Swish brand, and you learn so much from them. And I mean, of course, continuing to grow the most affordable, sustainable fashion platform with community Arcor. That's really big for us. And one thing that I think really keeps me going and inspiring me is seeing the impact that rentals has. Hearing someone that's like, oh, I rented this dress for my wedding or for a really special birthday. It was worth a few £100s, but they've saved so much. We've seen Swished on TV shows. We've seen it on red carpets, just people going out for brunch. It's so lovely to see. And we're still quite a small company. I recognize people that are coming back and renting again and again and again. And that's really lovely. So that's what I'm going to be focused on, really building our community, our repeat renters, and making it a really special experience to rent because it makes people feel really good.
Yeah, yeah. And I can hear how important community is to you and
Yeah,
how
absolutely.
much you enjoy connecting with them as
Yeah.
well. So where can we find you at Swished?
So we are our app. So if you search for Swished in the App Store, or we do have a website called rentwithswished.com.
Amazing, Hayfa. It's been really amazing to have you and really inspiring with everything that you're doing in the fashion industry. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much. Thank you. It was lovely to talk to you. Thank you.
You've been listening to She Rebel Radio. We thank you for listening and thank our headline partners NatWest for sponsoring this series. If this episode has inspired you, please pass it on and share with at least one other incredible woman, and don't forget to hit subscribe and leave us a review. You can find out more about me and my work at lulumins.com or on most social media platforms.